There are moments in life when time seems to slow down, not because of beauty or joy, but because of a sharp sting that cuts through the air like glass. For Kiana Brooks, that moment came at 8:46 a.m., just as she placed her carry-on in the overhead bin of Seat 2A, first class. She had boarded early as instructed. Her boarding pass, crisp and valid, had been scanned without issue. The flight was bound for San Francisco, a return home after a summer leadership summit at Harvard. Kiana, just 17 years old, had been selected as one of only 5 high school students nationwide to attend. She was poised, quiet, and composed beyond her years. Yet what came next would shatter every illusion that hard work and grace could shield her from judgment. "Excuse me," came a voice behind her, sharp like ice cracking. "I believe there's been a mistake. That seat doesn't belong to you." Kiana turned around. Standing before her was a woman in a slate gray uniform with a tight chignon and even tighter expression. The name tag read Heather Cline, senior flight attendant. Behind her loomed a uniformed security officer, bulky and unsmiling, with his arms folded. Kiana's heart skipped. "I'm sorry?" Heather pointed toward the seat. "Seat 2A, that's reserved for a VIP passenger. This is first class." "Yes," Kiana replied, carefully pulling her boarding pass from the side pocket of her tote bag. "That's the seat I was assigned. It's on my ticket." Heather didn't even glance at it. Instead, she gave a tight smile, performance, not a courtesy, and said, "Young lady, let's not make a scene. We've had some mix-ups lately with bookings. I'm going to have to ask you to step off the plane for re-verification." Behind them, a line of first-class passengers paused. Some raised eyebrows. A few looked away, but no one said anything. After all, it was easy to assume the girl in the simple hoodie, jeans, and natural curls must have made a mistake. But there was no mistake, and deep down, Kiana knew it. Still, she felt that cold grip of learned restraint, an instinct passed down by every black parent who'd ever warned their child how to survive public humiliation. She nodded once, lips tight. "Can I at least take my bag?" Heather waved impatiently. "Leave it for now. This will only take a moment." A lie. As Kiana followed the officer down the narrow aisle, she could feel the weight of invisible gazes pressing into her back. Judging, disbelieving. Some, perhaps, even relieved that they weren't the ones being asked to leave. No one asked for her name. No one checked the ticket in her hand. No one asked why a young black girl might not be welcomed in first class. Only that she step aside. The holding room at Gate 19 was sterile and windowless. Kiana was told to sit and wait. Her phone buzzed once. Dad. But the guard who sat near the exit pointed at the no devices sign. She stared at the blank wall in front of her, fists clenched on her knees, and tried to hold in the swell rising in her throat. Not from fear, but from humiliation. What hurt most wasn't being asked to leave. It was the assumption behind it, that someone like her, polite, well-dressed, ticket in hand, couldn't possibly belong where she did. Somewhere down the corridor, Heather Cline stood speaking to the captain. "We just avoided a PR disaster," she muttered, lowering her voice. "No idea how she got that ticket. Probably someone from the coach is trying to sneak in early." She didn't say it directly. She didn't have to. She had already decided Kiana didn't belong the moment she saw her skin, her curls, her presence in that seat. Meanwhile, back in the room, Kiana finally whispered to the guard, "Can I just call my father? He's expecting me." The man shrugged, indifferent. "You can make one call. Make it fast." Kiana quickly unlocked her phone, hands trembling. Not from guilt, but from righteous anger. She dialed a number. It rang once. "Hey, Dad," she said softly. "They pulled me off the plane. Again." Back in Silicon Valley, Miles Brooks stood on the terrace of a sleek glass building, the headquarters of Brooks Aeronautics, a company that had recently acquired majority shares in Astroflight, the airline Kiana had just been humiliated on. He was calm, too calm, a silence like thunder before the storm. "They pulled you off?" he repeated. "Yes," she said, swallowing hard. "Didn't even check my name. Just told me the seat wasn't mine." There was a long pause on the line. "Don't go anywhere," Miles said, his voice suddenly steel. "In 5 minutes, the world will know who just made the biggest mistake of their lives." Elsewhere on the plane, passengers settled in. Some murmured about the delay, but most returned to scrolling through their phones. Heather stood by the galley, sipping coffee, believing she'd done the right thing. She didn't know her entire career, her entire airline was about to enter free fall. Because she hadn't just pulled off any teenage girl. She had just dragged the daughter of the man who owned the sky. 5 minutes. That was all it took for the silence in Gate 19 to begin unraveling. Kiana sat quietly, her gaze blank as the fluorescent lights above hummed with indifferent rhythm. The guard nearby flipped through a worn security manual, uninterested in the girl beside him. To the world, this was just another airline mix-up. A routine inconvenience. A class error. But for Miles Brooks, those 5 minutes were enough. At Brooks Aeronautics headquarters, a sleek command room, usually reserved for emergency operations, lit up with incoming messages and alerts. Miles stood before a massive wall of screens, his senior aide, Daniel Jung, already by his side. "She's still not back on board?" Miles asked, eyes fixed on the real-time cabin camera feed he had silent access to. Thanks to a confidential security partnership initiated months ago when Brooks Aeronautics acquired a controlling stake in Astroflight. "No, sir. The passenger manifest still shows her as pending verification," Daniel replied, scrolling through flight logs. Miles exhaled through his nose, calm but smoldering. "Get me the name of the gate agent who ordered the removal. I want a full playback of her interaction with my daughter." "Yes, sir." Within seconds, facial recognition software locked onto Heather Cline. Her employee record popped up. Years of service. Clean record. Commendations. But none of that mattered now, because she had made one fatal assumption. That appearance could define status. Back at the gate, Kiana checked the time. She had been sitting for almost 23 minutes now. Her seat, 2A, was likely occupied by someone else, or maybe sitting empty. And yet no one had returned to explain anything. She looked at the officer again. "Can I ask, what exactly are we waiting for?" He shrugged. "Supervisor clearance, I guess. Not my call." It was the kind of shrug that people use when they've stopped seeing you as a person and started seeing you as a task, as someone else's problem. Kiana folded her hands, but her fingers trembled slightly. This wasn't the first time something like this had happened. Not with this airline, and not to her. But it was the first time it hurt this much. Because this time, she had done everything right. There had been no misunderstanding, no late arrival, no confusion about class. She was just a black girl in first class, and apparently that was still enough to raise suspicion. She closed her eyes, remembering her father's voice. "They'll judge you before they know your name. Your job isn't to change their eyes. It's to keep your head up and let them fall on their own." A small, defiant flame ignited inside her. Meanwhile, in Flight 291's cockpit, the pilot, Captain Reynolds, was reviewing the latest weather patterns on his screen when his headset pinged. It was Ops Command. "Captain, this is HQ. You are to delay pushback until further notice." He raised an eyebrow. "That's unusual. What's going on?" "Passenger situation under review. Expect an executive directive shortly." "Executive?" "Yes, sir, from Mr. Miles Brooks's office." The captain blinked. He hadn't realized the CEO's daughter was supposed to be on board. A shift in tone swept through the cockpit. 1 minute, it was just another transcontinental flight. Next, it was a matter of corporate survival. In the main cabin, Heather returned from the galley with a slight bounce in her step. She had just spoken with the ground team, who confirmed a replacement passenger had been moved in 2A. Her job, she believed, was done. The girl had probably been assigned the wrong ticket. That was the story she had already told herself 3 times to avoid confronting the truth. That she had made a judgment call based on appearance, not protocol. As she strolled past the first-class aisle, she caught the eye of a sharply dressed man seated in 2C. He looked puzzled. "Wasn't there a young girl here earlier?" he asked, pointing subtly at 2A. Heather stiffened, her smile faltering just a touch. "There was a booking error, all taken care of now." But the man gave a slow nod, unconvinced. He was quiet, but he had seen enough in his career to recognize when something didn't sit right. He wasn't just a first-class passenger. He was Judge Malcolm Everett, federal circuit judge for the 9th District, and a longtime friend of Miles Brooks. He pulled out his phone and sent a quick text. "Something happened with your daughter on Flight 291. You may want to intervene sooner rather than later." Back in the executive command room, Daniel looked up from his tablet. "Sir, the judge on board just messaged you. He's concerned." Miles didn't respond at first. His gaze had shifted to the screen showing Heather sipping coffee at the galley, utterly unaware of the storm she had unleashed. Then he said calmly, "Make the call." Daniel pressed a button on the console. Within seconds, the airport's internal line connected directly to the gate's terminal manager, who suddenly found himself standing at attention, facing orders from the CEO himself. "Put her back on the plane," Miles said, voice cold and composed. "And tell your staff this. We don't tolerate discrimination disguised as policy." The terminal manager stammered. Yes, yes, Mr. Brooks. I'll see to it personally." "Do better," Miles said, then hung up. At gate 19, a woman in a navy blue suit approached Kiana. Her heels clicked briskly against the linoleum, and her face was tight with nervous energy. "Miss Brooks?" Kiana stood, wary. "Yes." The woman extended a hand. "I'm Dana Reyes, head of passenger experience. I want to personally apologize for the delay. There's been a misunderstanding." Kiana didn't take her hand. She simply looked her in the eye and said, "Was it a misunderstanding or just a reaction?" Dana hesitated. "Regardless, you're being escorted back to your seat. Right now." As they walked through the jet bridge, Kiana spotted passengers craning their necks through the windows, wondering what the delay was. When she stepped on board, everything stopped. Heather's smile froze midair. The cabin crew's chatter halted, and Judge Everett lowered his phone and nodded once in quiet approval. Kiana didn't say a word. She walked down the aisle with dignity, her shoulders straight, and took her seat at 2A. The man in it had been asked to move back to business class moments earlier. Heather tried to approach, but the lead flight supervisor signaled her to stop. There were consequences coming. She just didn't know how close they were. As the aircraft doors finally closed and the plane pulled back from the gate, Heather stood by the galley once more. Only now her confidence was gone. The whispers had begun. The tension was thick, and in her gut she felt it. She had judged the wrong girl. The seatbelt sign chimed off with a familiar ding as Flight 291 leveled out at 35,000 feet. But for Heather Cline, the calm hum of altitude was no comfort. She stood frozen at the galley door, replaying Kiana's return in her mind like a silent horror film. The way the supervisor had gently waved her off when she tried to apologize. The way every first-class passenger suddenly looked at her like they were seeing her for the first time, and not in a good way. Worst of all, the girl had said nothing. Not a single word of protest, no confrontation, no outrage, just quiet dignity. And somehow that was far more damning than any argument could have been. In seat 2A, Kiana stared out the window, her earbuds in but no music playing. She didn't need music right now. What she needed was to breathe. Every second of humiliation, every pair of eyes watching her return, every forced smile from the crew, it clung to her skin like cold sweat. Her phone vibrated softly. A message from her father. "Handled. Stay calm. I love you." She blinked back a tear, but just as she was about to turn the screen off, she saw something else pop up. Brooks Watchdog. Breaking, passenger removed from Flight 291 for not looking the part of first class. Turns out it's Miles Brooks' daughter. Waiting on official response. Developing story. The tweet had already racked up 23,000 views, and it had only been posted 6 minutes ago. Kiana's pulse quickened. She had told no one. 30 rows back, a teenage girl named Jasmine Tran, a freshman journalism student from NYU, scrolled through her feed and nearly dropped her phone. She had watched the gate drama from a distance earlier. She hadn't heard the full exchange, but she'd seen the tense body language. Now, with this tweet going viral, it clicked. She tapped open her video app and uploaded the clip she had recorded earlier that morning, Heather confronting Kiana at the gate and pulling her aside. She captioned it, "This is what we're doing now in 2025? Black girl gets kicked off first class for being too young and brown? Watch this." 10 minutes later, it had 74,000 views, then 200,000. Then a trending hashtag, Hush is back in the cockpit. Captain Reynolds received a discreet call from the internal comms team. "Sir, be advised. There's a viral incident related to a passenger on board. Our social team is monitoring it in real time." The captain groaned inwardly. What kind of incident? The CEO's daughter. Removed. Videos out. We've already been tagged in over 3,000 posts. Just a heads up before landing prep. Reynolds rubbed his temples. He'd seen situations like this before, from afar, but this one was happening in real time, on his plane. At Astroflight's HQ, chaos had begun. The vice president of corporate communications, Marla Jennings, had just stepped out of a lunch meeting when her phone buzzed 12 times in a row. Her assistant barreled down the hallway to meet her halfway. "We have a situation," she gasped. "Flight 291, gate incident. Passenger is Kiana Brooks." Marla stopped in her tracks. "As in that Brooks?" "CEO's daughter. Videos are up. It's already in national news aggregators. One blogger's calling it the Rosa Parks of the sky." Marla didn't waste another second. "Pull all surveillance footage. Draft 2 apology statements, one internal, one public, and get me Heather Cline's entire personnel file. Right now." On board, Heather's world had begun to shrink. It started with the whispering in the cabin. Then came the subtle glances from the flight attendants, each more avoidant than the last. Even the co-pilot, who usually joked with her during breaks, kept his distance. She finally opened her phone and froze. Sky Justice. Now. Meet Heather Cline, the gate agent who humiliated a black teen for daring to sit in first class. She didn't know the girl was CEO Miles Brooks's daughter. She does now. The photo was hers, pulled from her LinkedIn. Her full name, her airport, even her job title. There was no escaping it. Heather gripped the counter for balance as her stomach dropped. Her face was now a national symbol, for all the wrong reasons. Meanwhile, back in Los Angeles, Miles Brooks had just stepped into a closed-door meeting with 5 senior executives. No greetings, no small talk. He placed his phone face down on the table and looked each of them in the eye. "Before you speak, let me be clear," he began, voice like steel wrapped in silk. "This is not just a PR issue. This is a systemic failure." They nodded nervously. "This wasn't about policy," he continued. "It was about perception. And perception is where racism lives when rules are weaponized." No one dared interrupt. "I want a full audit of all passenger treatment reports for the last 2 years. I want an internal hotline open by tonight. Anonymous, protected, and reported directly to me. And I want this Heather Cline off active duty immediately." "Yes, sir," someone whispered. Miles stood, buttoned his jacket, and added one last thing. "And call the board. I'll be making a statement tonight." In first class, Kiana finally opened Twitter again. Notifications exploded like fireworks. One DM caught her eye from a verified user. Opal Sanders, anchor of a major news show. "Kiana, I know this is overwhelming, but if you're open to it, I'd love to feature your voice. Your silence speaks volumes, but the world would listen if you choose to speak. Reach out when you're ready." She put the phone down. The noise was deafening. But her father's words came back again. "They'll judge you before they know your name." Only now, they knew her name. At the rear of the plane, Heather was called to the service phone. It was the ground team. "Miss Cline, effective immediately, you are placed on administrative leave pending investigation. You are not to perform any further duties for the remainder of this flight. Remain in crew seating after landing." She didn't speak. She simply hung up the phone and sat down, her face pale. The moment she had feared had arrived. But it wasn't the job suspension that rattled her most. It was the realization that the girl never needed to scream, never needed to record. All she did was exist, and the world had responded to her. At exactly 7:04 p.m. EST, the hashtag #Dashihushes trended, Mar1 on X, formerly Twitter, surpassing even the presidential primary coverage. What started as a video of a gate incident had snowballed into a national conversation about race, class, and silent dignity. And Kiana Brooks, the young woman who had said nothing, was now everywhere. News outlets called it the slap that never happened. Not a literal strike, but a symbolic blow, delivered quietly, absorbed completely, and answered with restraint so powerful it echoed across the country. But for Kiana, none of that mattered right now. She was in her hotel room in Chicago, having just landed hours earlier, sitting on the edge of the bed with her shoes still on. The city lights blinked behind her window, but she saw none of it. The room was too quiet, yet her mind was too loud. Her phone hadn't stopped vibrating since she turned it back on after the flight. She had 87 missed calls, 42 interview requests. Thousands of strangers flooded her DMs with support, praise, and apologies for what people like Heather had done. Some messages were deeply personal. "I'm crying. You reminded me I didn't have to beg to be respected. You were every one of us who ever got told, 'That seat isn't for you.'" But Kiana hadn't responded to any of them. Instead, she stared at one message. Just one. From her father. "Dinner tonight. Just us. No PR." That evening, inside a quiet Italian bistro tucked into a side street near Millennium Park, Kiana arrived to find her father, Miles Brooks, already seated. He stood as she approached, arms open. They embraced in a long, wordless moment. No reporters, no board members, no advisors, just a father and his daughter. "I'm proud of you," Miles said softly. Kiana smiled faintly, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. "For what? Doing nothing? For not doing what the world expected you to do. You didn't curse. You didn't film. You didn't perform pain for cameras." She stirred her water absently. "I just wanted to sit in the seat I paid for." Miles's expression sobered. "You didn't just sit. You showed millions what silent power looks like." There was a pause, then he leaned in, lowering his voice. "But I'll ask you this once, and only once. Do you want to speak?" Kiana looked away. "I don't know," she admitted. "It feels like if I say nothing, I disappoint people who saw themselves in me. But if I speak, I become a symbol I never asked to be." Miles nodded slowly, letting the words settle. "You don't owe anyone a performance. But if you do choose to speak, speak from truth, not pressure." He reached into his coat and handed her a small envelope. "What's this?" she asked. "A letter from your mother. She wrote it a week before she passed. I've been saving it for a moment when you'd need to remember your voice." Kiana held it like it might disappear if she blinked. She didn't open it. Not yet. But in her heart, a door began to unlock. Back at Astroflight's headquarters, the mood was anything but calm. A closed-door emergency meeting had been called, one that included board members, legal counsel, HR executives, and for the first time in years, 2 civil rights lawyers. The incident had escalated from viral moment to corporate reckoning. The interim CEO, Patricia Dunn, stood at the head of the boardroom. "This isn't about Heather Cline anymore," she said bluntly. "This is about a systemic failure to recognize dignity across every class line, every racial line, and every gate desk." No one dared dispute her. "We are not here to defend ourselves. We're here to rebuild our house before it burns to the ground." She tapped on the screen behind her, showing projected financial fallout. Gubby, stock value down 8.4% in 24 hours. Major advertisers pulling partnerships. Internal employee unrest across 6 regional branches. Lawsuit inquiries from 3 unrelated customers using this momentum. Then she pointed to a still image from the video. Kiana standing at the gate, clutching her bag, head high despite the humiliation. "She didn't scream. She didn't call us names. She did something worse," Patricia said. "She revealed us to ourselves." Elsewhere in Chicago, Heather Cline sat in a small corporate hotel room provided temporarily by the airline. Her phone had been turned off by HR. Her access badge was revoked. Her LinkedIn was loaded with hate. Her sister stopped answering calls. Even her mother said, "Heather, what did you do?" She stared at the wall, eyes sunken, unable to eat. For the first time in years, Heather realized she didn't have an answer. Not to the public, not to the company, not even to herself. She'd followed policy. She'd used professional discretion, but deep down she knew. She didn't remove Kiana because of a boarding issue. She removed her because something in her gut, something unspoken and unexamined, screamed, "She doesn't belong here." And now that voice had ruined her. At 11:42 p.m., Kiana finally opened the envelope. Her mother's handwriting was smooth, even elegant. Faint lavender perfume still clung to the paper. "My dearest Kiana, one day someone will try to reduce you to a color, a class, or a cost. Don't let them. Your dignity is not a reaction, it's a truth. And truth, my darling, doesn't raise its voice, it simply remains." Tears streamed down her face. She folded the letter back and whispered, "Thank you, Mama." Then she reached for her phone, not to post, not to rage, but to write quietly, firmly, and finally. The sun rose differently that morning. It wasn't just Chicago catching its breath, it was the entire country. Major headlines across America bore the same phrase: "She finally speaks." Kiana hadn't appeared on camera. She hadn't stood at a podium. But at 6 a.m. sharp, she posted a written letter on her private social media accounts. No press release, no corporate watermark. Just her voice, in her words on a plain white background. "To those who watched me stand in silence, thank you for hearing what I couldn't say out loud. On that day, I wasn't just standing for a seat. I was standing for every person who's ever been told, quietly or loudly, that they don't belong where they've worked for, paid for, or dreamed of. I didn't speak then, not because I was afraid, but because I knew the silence would echo longer. And if that silence brought reflection, then maybe it served its purpose. But now, I am ready to use my voice." The post ended with a quote from her mother's letter: "Truth doesn't raise its voice, it simply remains." Within minutes, it went viral. Not just reposted, but translated into multiple languages, read aloud on television, printed on t-shirts, featured on banners in college campuses and airport terminals. Influencers, civil rights leaders, and even political figures began calling her words a manifesto of grace under fire. But the most surprising reaction came from within Astroflight. Inside the company's downtown headquarters, interim CEO Patricia Dunn called an emergency press conference, not to save face, to surrender it. Standing in front of national cameras with the company's logo now faded into the background, she began not with defense but with apology. "We have failed," she said. "We failed to see, we failed to listen, we failed to honor the very passengers who keep us in the skies." Patricia didn't read from a script. She named Kiana directly. She admitted the incident exposed a larger rot within their structure, where unconscious bias had been left unchallenged and dignity had been selectively applied. Then, to everyone's surprise, she added, "And so today, we extend not just our apology, but an invitation. To Ms. Brooks and to those who stood with her, we ask you to help us rebuild." Reporters gasped. Some whispered. But Patricia continued, "Real change cannot be scripted. It must be shared. And we believe this moment is no longer about policy, it's about partnership." It was the boldest public pivot the airline had ever made. Meanwhile, in a quieter corner of the city, Heather Cline sat with her attorney across from an HR representative and a crisis management expert. Her world had shrunk. Her friends had vanished. Her face was on every "do not hire" Reddit thread in aviation. But Heather wasn't there to plead for her job. "I don't want a statement," she said quietly. "I want a conversation. With her." The room fell silent. "Who?" the attorney asked cautiously. Heather didn't blink. "Kiana." At first, Kiana refused. "I have no interest in being someone's redemption arc," she told Miles over dinner that night. But he simply nodded and said, "Then don't go for her. Go for yourself." She looked at him, unsure, and that night she dreamed of the gate again. The moment, the eyes, the unspoken, "You don't belong here." But this time, she turned around in the dream, and instead of walking away, she sat and spoke. 2 days later, at a private room inside the Fairmont Hotel, no cameras, no microphones, Kiana entered, flanked by her father and her attorney. Heather stood when she saw her. She looked like a shadow of her former self. No badge, no blazer, just a wrinkled gray sweater and trembling hands. "Thank you for coming," Heather said. Kiana didn't reply at first. She sat across from her, eyes steady. Heather took a breath. "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even expect understanding. But I needed to tell you face to face that what I did wasn't just a mistake. It was a belief I didn't know I had." She lowered her head. "I saw you. And instead of questioning myself, I questioned your place. I used protocol as a shield. But the truth is, I didn't see you. I saw my fear, my bias, my ignorance." Kiana finally spoke, her voice calm. "And what do you see now?" Heather looked up, eyes glistening. A person I should have respected from the start. A person who changed how I understand power. There was a pause. Then Kiana leaned forward slightly. Do you think you should be given a second chance? Heather hesitated. I think I need to earn the right to ask for one. And for the first time since the incident, Kiana felt something shift. Not sympathy, not forgiveness, but clarity. She stood up. I didn't come here to help you feel better, Heather. I came here to stop carrying you in my head. And with that, she left the room. But before she exited fully, she turned back once. I hope you find a better version of yourself, because the world doesn't need your guilt. It needs your growth. That evening, Kiana's final words trended again. Not because she posted them, but because someone in the room had written them down and shared the paraphrased version. The world doesn't need your guilt. It needs your growth. It became a quote printed on signs at protests, stitched onto pillows in bookstores, and even written on classroom walls. But Kiana didn't need to watch it spread. She was finally at peace, and she had one more thing to do. 3 weeks later, in front of a packed auditorium at Howard University, Kiana took the stage. Astroflight had invited her to speak, not as a passenger, not as a plaintiff, but as a partner. She had accepted on one condition. I speak on my terms, and I speak not to defend, but to demand better. And that's what she did. She spoke not of revenge, but of renewal. She didn't list names. She listed systems. She didn't ask for applause. She asked for action. And when she ended her talk, the entire room rose, not just to honor her, but to honor every silent battle fought in boardrooms, classrooms, and gate areas across the world. A storm was coming, not the kind that darkened skies, but the kind that rewired institutions. 1 week after Kiana's speech, Astroflight released a public initiative titled The Brooks Accord, Equity in Flight. The title was Patricia Dunn's idea, but the principles were Kiana's. The document was only 12 pages long, but those 12 pages promised more transformation than the airline had seen in 50 years. And at the center of it all, Kiana Brooks, officially named Chief Equity Advisor to the Board of Directors. It was the first role of its kind. Unpaid, uncontrolled, unfiltered. She would answer to no executive, but instead report directly to a rotating community board composed of passengers, flight crew members, racial justice advocates, and academic scholars. Some investors called it optics, but within days the company's stock rose by 4.2%. Astroflight wasn't just recovering, it was becoming a case study. Inside the glass conference room on the 45th floor, Kiana sat across from Patricia, two other board members, and a woman named Anjali Mehta, a civil rights professor from Stanford. They were drafting the most radical clause in the Brooks Accord yet, a nationwide accountability program for airline staff who had been suspended due to racially biased misconduct, not to punish, but to retrain and reintegrate. Not everyone supported the idea. Even Miles had hesitated when Kiana first proposed it. Why give them another chance, he asked. Kiana answered with quiet clarity. Because if we only exile them, they'll return elsewhere, unchanged. But if they're forced to confront the system inside themselves, maybe the next passenger doesn't have to pay the price. It was the kind of solution only someone who had endured both silence and grace could envision. So they named it the Reboarding Program. Participants would undergo months of supervised training, anti-bias education, psychological counseling, and most crucially, direct dialogue with the very communities they had harmed. The public reaction? Divided. Some called it brave, some called it naive. But Kiana didn't flinch. She had one requirement. Heather Cline would be the first participant. Heather's lawyer nearly quit when he heard. You're agreeing to this? Public rehabilitation? No PR shield? No image protection? Heather didn't respond. Not because she agreed, because for once, she didn't know who she was defending anymore, herself, or the version of her that let racism pass as protocol. She had spent the last month in isolation. No social media, no former colleagues, no distractions, just books, therapy, and daily assignments prepared by the reboarding team. And now the final phase required her to do what no legal training had prepared her for. Face the people she hurt, without defense, without deflection. The first session took place in an auditorium at a local community college in Atlanta. No cameras, no scripts, just Heather and a semicircle of black and brown passengers who had filed complaints over the past decade against various airlines, including some against her. She walked into the room holding a small notebook. No makeup, no press-ready smile, just the truth. She stood at the center and said, "I'm not here to be forgiven. I'm here because my silence was a weapon I didn't even know I was carrying." Then she sat, and for 3 hours she listened. Listened to stories of humiliation, exclusion, anger, and grief. Listened to a father describe being separated from his daughter mid-flight. Listened to a woman who had been asked to change seats to accommodate a platinum member. Listened to a teenager, no, older than Kiana, describe how he hadn't flown since he was 14 because of the way staff made him feel disposable. Heather didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just wrote. And when the moderator asked if she had anything to say, she closed the notebook and replied, "I think I'm only now learning to listen, and I suspect I've got a long way to go before I'm ready to speak again." The room was still, and then someone in the back nodded slowly. Not acceptance, not approved, but the beginning of something harder to earn. Earned respect. Back at headquarters, Kiana watched the footage in private. She wasn't there to oversee Heather's session, but she needed to see whether this program was more than symbolic. And what she saw was surprising, not because Heather had changed completely, but because she had stopped performing. That was the first step. A few hours later, Kiana received a text message. It was from an anonymous number, just 6 words. "I didn't deserve that uniform. H." Kiana stared at it. She didn't reply, but she saved the message. Not as a keepsake, as a data point, proof that maybe, just maybe, change didn't begin in the press, it began in the private. Meanwhile, Astroflight launched a new training video titled "Flight is for Everyone," narrated by Kiana herself. No actors, just real stories, real names, and a simple message at the end. What you see when you look at a passenger isn't a seat number, it's a story, and stories deserve dignity. The training was rolled out to all 32,000 employees within 1 month. Feedback was overwhelming. Flight attendants cried in break rooms. Pilots asked for additional dialogue sessions. And a former skeptic on the board whispered to Patricia, "She's not just fixing the company, she's healing it." In the following weeks, universities requested to license the reboarding program as a national case study. Airlines that once mocked the policy now asked for consulting sessions. And one evening, as Kiana walked past an airport gate on her way to catch a red-eye to D.C., she overheard a gate agent gently say to a young black teen, "You're all set. And if you need anything, I'm right here." He smiled, and for the first time in a long time, so did she. But the journey wasn't over. A viral video emerged from another airline, showing a passenger being profiled mid-flight. Public fury ignited again, but this time, something different happened. Instead of just outrage, people began asking, why aren't we doing what Astroflight did? It had become a benchmark, not because they had fixed everything, but because they had started. And at the center of that start wasn't a CEO, wasn't a politician, it wasn't a committee. It was a young black woman who once stood in silence. And now the nation was listening to every word she chose to say. For the first time in months, Kiana allowed herself to breathe. The launch of Astroflight's reform was smoother than expected. Headlines were calling it a blueprint for modern corporate justice. The airline's stock had stabilized. Public confidence, once shattered, now hovered at cautious optimism. But Kiana knew better than to mistake silence for peace. One quiet email. It started with a single message, subject line, urgent, anomaly in internal audit logs, flagged by IT. The sender was Lucas Brennan, a quiet cybersecurity lead who rarely spoke in meetings unless called upon. Kiana opened the email on her tablet while waiting to board a flight to New York for a conference on equitable leadership. The contents made her stomach knot. "Hi, Ms. Brooks. We've detected irregular access to sensitive internal documents related to the reboarding program. Someone has been downloading logs, altering staff training records, and adjusting timestamps to make it appear that certain employees completed anti-bias training when they never did. We've traced this behavior back to a senior-level account, C. Fowler, Caleb Fowler, head of operations, longtime friend of Patricia Dunn, publicly supportive of the reforms. Privately, well, no one had ever questioned him until now. The problem with Trust Caleb had been with Astroflight for 18 years. He spoke well, dressed sharper than most, knew the right talking points and delivered them with rehearsed ease. He had been one of the first to stand beside Patricia when the company went into crisis. And yet he was sabotaging the very reforms he endorsed. Kiana didn't want to believe it, but Lucas attached a screen recording video, Caleb's credentials logging in remotely at 3:17 a.m., editing Heather's training record to reflect a completed tag 3 days before her first session. It wasn't a one-time breach. It was systemic. The confrontation Kiana didn't go to Patricia first. She went straight to the 22nd floor where Caleb's office sat, floor-to-ceiling windows, a globe bar card in the corner, a framed photo of him shaking hands with a senator. He greeted her with his usual charm. "Kiana, always a pleasure. You here to add a new clause to the accord?" he said, laughing. She didn't sit. "I need to talk to you, privately." He gestured toward the glass doors. "Always." Once the door clicked shut, her tone changed. "We've reviewed system logs, Caleb. You've been altering compliance records." A flicker crossed his face, then vanished. "I think you've been misinformed," he said smoothly. "We have video footage, IP logs, even timestamps from the server host." Caleb took a slow breath and leaned back. "I did what needed to be done. You have no idea how fragile this company is. Investors were jittery. Heather's full training? That was a PR risk." Kiana stared at him. "You forged her progress to speed up certification? I protected the airline. You're trying to rebuild it like it's a college thesis. This is real business, Kiana." Her voice remained calm, but her eyes hardened. "This company asked me to help heal it. You're reopening the wounds." Then she turned to leave. But before she could, Caleb added quietly, "Be careful how far you push, Kiana. Not everyone is as excited about this new Astroflight as you are." The boardroom divide. That night, Kiana met with Patricia. Lucas joined, bringing the full evidence. Patricia listened, pale and silent. Her fingers tapped the mahogany table as the reality set in. One of her closest allies had betrayed not only the board, but the public. "I trusted him," she muttered. "So did I," Kiana replied. "But trust doesn't outweigh impact." Patricia exhaled. "We have two options. Fire him quietly and issue a soft statement, or go public and risk a new media firestorm." Kiana didn't hesitate. "If we go quiet, we prove every cynic right, that this reform was just theater." A long silence. Then Patricia nodded. "Prepare the statement. Make it honest." The fallout. The press conference was brief. Patricia led. "In our effort to build a more transparent future, we must also acknowledge when parts of our foundation fail. Today, we have terminated Mr. Caleb Fowler, head of operations, due to deliberate interference with our reboarding program." Social media exploded. Some praised the transparency. Others said, "See, they can't even trust their people." But something else happened too. Astroflight's customer trust ratings, already climbing, spiked by another 8%, because people didn't just want perfection, they wanted accountability. Heather's second session. Meanwhile, Heather's journey continued. Now stripped of the falsified certifications, she was required to restart her second phase of training, this time in front of an even tougher audience, college students studying social justice, many of whom had protested against Astroflight just months earlier. Some booed when she entered, but Heather stood firm. "I'm not here to erase my past. I'm here because the only way forward is through it." She paused. "And if any of you want to ask me what it felt like to be on the other side, I'll tell you, but I won't defend it." A long silence followed, then a young woman stood up. "Good, because we're not interested in your defense. We're interested in your growth." For the first time, Heather didn't flinch. She nodded and began again. Kiana's doubt, Miles' advice. Later that evening, as Kiana walked the quiet halls of HQ alone, she called Miles. "Was I wrong to trust Caleb?" she asked. There was a pause on the other end. "No," he finally said. You were wrong to expect someone like him to choose growth over control. That's not on you. That's on the system that raised him to believe control was all that mattered. Kiana stood at the window, looking down at the runway where planes blinked like stars below. I'm scared it's going to keep happening. It will, Miles said, but you're not here to stop every fire. You're here to light a new kind of torch. 2 weeks after Caleb Fowler's dismissal, something unexpected happened. A rival airline, Skybridge Aviation, known for its elite branding and executive clientele, released a glowing press statement titled, Skybridge Launches Ethical Horizons Program, Redefining Industry Standards. The wording was strikingly familiar, too familiar. The public, still riding the emotional wave of Astroflight's reforms, welcomed the announcement. Social media lauded Skybridge for following Astroflight's lead, with headlines like, Reform is contagious, Skybridge steps up, airlines are listening, finally. But Kiana felt a pang of unease, and she wasn't alone. The first clue came from an unexpected source, a junior analyst named Maribel Chen, who had been tracking airline compliance patterns for a nonprofit watchdog. She sent an encrypted email to Kiana. Ms. Brooks, I've been following Astroflight's reform closely. Something about Skybridge's announcement doesn't add up. Their new training curriculum is identical to yours verbatim. But here's the kicker. No real workshops have been scheduled. It's PR theater, and I think I have proof. Attached was a spreadsheet showing internal event calendars from Skybridge's employee portal. All empty. No trainers, no times. Just placeholders. And at the bottom of the file was a memo with a chilling line. Maintain the visual appearance of reform. No need for disruptive retraining at this stage. Kiana leaned back in her chair. They weren't just copying her program. They were weaponizing it. Maribel agreed to go public on one condition. She wouldn't stand alone. Together, they drafted a report. Astroflight refused to co-sign it directly, to avoid appearing vindictive toward a competitor. But Kiana, as a private citizen, released the expose on her blog and LinkedIn. The post was titled, Reform versus Replication, Why Justice Can't Be Imitated Without Integrity. It went viral in 36 hours. News outlets picked it up. Skybridge issued a nervous counterstatement, calling it an unfounded attack. But whistleblowers from within Skybridge began leaking their confirmations. Photos of empty training rooms, memos discouraging diversity rhetoric. A voicemail from a VP saying, just slap Kiana Brooks' name on something and the press will love it. The next morning, Kiana's assistant walked into her office with wide eyes. There's a call for you from the Office of the Senate Committee on Transportation and Ethics. Kiana paused, then picked up. Ms. Brooks, we'd like to formally invite you to testify at our upcoming hearing. We believe your experience offers a rare and necessary perspective. She hesitated. Of course, she replied. But inside she trembled. She was a policy consultant, not a politician. But something in her gut told her. This moment wasn't about comfort. It was about duty. The days leading up to the hearing were a blur. Media vans are parked outside Astroflight headquarters. Dozens of op-eds speculated on what she would say. Supporters mailed handwritten letters. Critics dug into her old social media posts. Former friends called just to wish her luck, with tension in their voices. Miles came to visit the night before she flew to D.C. They sat on her balcony, overlooking the skyline. Are you afraid? He asked. Yes, she admitted. Not of speaking, but of saying it wrong, of making it worse. Miles handed her a cup of tea. Then say the truth, even if your voice shakes. Senate Committee Room 226 was packed. Cameras, notepads, suits, whispers. The committee chair, Senator Alana Roy, a composed black woman with silver-rimmed glasses, welcomed her with a nod. Ms. Brooks, thank you for joining us. Kiana placed her notes in front of her, cleared her throat, and began. I did not come here to represent a company. I came here to represent the possibility that an industry can unlearn harm if it chooses to. Reform is not a press release. It's not a rebranded slogan. And it's certainly not something you copy-paste to pacify criticism. Reform is expensive. It costs comfort. It costs ego. And it demands the humility to admit you were part of the problem. At Astroflight, We didn't find redemption. We found responsibility. If you want this industry to change, don't just fund the next marketing campaign. Fund accountability. Fund whistleblower protections. Fund third-party audits. Because no amount of altitude will save you if the rot begins on the ground. There was silence. Then slow applause from observers, not senators. But it was enough. Senator Roy leaned forward and said softly, "You may have just shifted the center of gravity in this conversation." That evening, Kiana returned to her hotel, exhausted. She didn't turn on the TV. She didn't scroll. She just stood by the window, hands trembling, heart both heavy and hopeful. Downstairs, a staffer handed her an envelope that had been delivered by courier. No return name. Inside was a single note. "You don't know me. I work for a different airline. But today I saw you speak, and I want to change too." Kiana smiled, not because it was over, but because it was just beginning. 2 days after her testimony in Washington, Kiana returned to her office at Astroflight. Everything felt different. The staff greeted her with nervous politeness. Eyes darted away. Conversations halted as she passed. Something was wrong, and she found out what barely an hour later. Miles stormed into her office, his phone in hand. "You need to see this." An anonymous account had leaked a confidential Astroflight document to a major news outlet. The document appeared to suggest that Astroflight had strategically delayed the processing of certain passenger complaints before the reforms, particularly those involving racial bias. Even worse, there was an internal email from Caleb Fowler, dated months before he was dismissed, saying, "Let's not open that can of worms yet. Wait till the press cycle dies down." Though Kiana had never seen this email before, her name was mentioned in a reply chain. "Once Kiana signs off on the initiative, we'll quietly bury the backlog under legacy policy realignment." The media were merciless. Headlines screamed, "Was Astroflight's reform a smokescreen? New hero or just another corporate figurehead? Brooks under fire. Was the cleanup ever real?" Kiana gathered her senior leadership team that afternoon. Everyone looked rattled. The PR director suggested immediate damage control. "Let's issue a statement. Deny knowledge. Reaffirm our commitment. Blame the old guard." Kiana looked at the man coldly. "No." Silence fell. "I won't protect a system by pretending this leak isn't real. We don't deny the truth. We confront it, openly." Someone asked, "Even if it means losing investor confidence?" Kiana stood. "If they want to invest in illusions, they chose the wrong company." Instead of hiding, Kiana did something unexpected. She scheduled a live stream. No script. No polished backdrop. Just her, in a plain blue blouse, sitting in her office with a laptop camera. The live stream title? Unfiltered, What You Deserve to Know. Thousands joined within minutes. She began. "I saw the document too. Yes, it's real. No, I didn't write it. But yes, my name is on it. And I take responsibility, not because I orchestrated that decision, but because I was part of a system that allowed it to happen. If Astroflight ever delayed justice to protect its reputation, that is a stain on all of us, including me. And if any passenger felt silenced, forgotten, or unworthy because of our actions, you have every right to be furious. You deserve more than an apology. You deserve access to the truth. So here's what we're doing next." She laid out 3 bold steps. Immediate publication of all pre-reform complaint archives with redacted personal info. An independent third-party review of Astroflight's complaint handling for the past 5 years. A newly formed Passenger Justice Council made up of former complainants, community leaders, and a civil rights expert to advise the airline directly. The response was seismic. At first, media outlets called it a high-stakes confession, but the tone began to shift. Victims who had filed complaints years ago began to post online, many saying, "This is the first time anyone from Astroflight has acknowledged what happened to us." One former passenger, Deshaun Reddick, had his story resurface. He had been racially profiled in 2018 and offered only a $50 voucher. Now he was being invited to sit on the new council. He posted, "Back then they called me angry. Now they're calling me necessary. Thank you, Ms. Brooks." 3 days after the live stream, Astroflight's stock, initially down 14%, began to rebound. Not because the scandal was over, but because Kiana didn't run. She owned the truth. She let the shame in and let it teach the organization something. Board members who had once questioned her resolve now sent quiet emails of support. One wrote, "I disagreed with your methods, but you've shown us what real leadership looks like." That evening, alone in her apartment, Kiana received a text. It was from an unknown number. "You won't believe how many of us were waiting for someone like you. The industry is scared. That means you're doing it right." She didn't know who sent it, but she knew one thing. The sky was shaking, not from turbulence, but from transformation. And for the first time in decades, aviation didn't just belong to the elite in suits. It belonged to the people who once had no voice at 30,000 feet. The ballroom at the Grand Mariner Hotel was packed with over 600 of the most powerful names in aviation. CEOs, union leaders, regulators, investors, and cameras. Cameras everywhere. This wasn't just another industry summit. This was the National Aviation Equity Conference, the first of its kind. Born out of public pressure after Astroflight's internal scandal, it had become an emergency call to action. And at the center of it all, sitting at the front row in a charcoal blazer and silk blouse, was Kiana Brooks. She hadn't planned on speaking. She had come to listen. But less than 10 minutes into the opening remarks, the moderator said, "Before we move on to data, let's begin with a voice that catalyzed this moment. Ms. Brooks, the floor is yours." Applause, hesitant at first, then rising. Kiana walked to the podium. She looked over the sea of executives, lobbyists, and government representatives. Some stared blankly, some smiled, curious, and some, like Darren Chase, CEO of Skybridge Airlines, looked annoyed. She took a breath. 6 months ago, I never imagined I'd be standing here. When I joined Astroflight's board, I thought my job was operational: improve efficiency, modernize systems, and grow shareholder value. But then I watched a black teenage boy get humiliated in first class, and suddenly none of those goals mattered. What mattered was this question: who are we serving at 30,000 feet? She let the silence hang. Let me be clear. I'm not here to condemn this industry. I'm here to invite it to grow up. We've built our towers on polished slogans. Every passenger matters. Service above all. But slogans don't comfort a crying child being accused of theft mid-flight. They don't erase the trauma of being forced to prove your belonging just because your skin doesn't match the privilege we've normalized in first class. A ripple moved through the room. Real reform isn't a press release. It's how you budget. It's who you promote. It's who you fire. And it's whether you can stomach putting your reputation at risk to protect someone with no microphone. Then she turned toward Darren Chase. "Mr. Chase, Skybridge Airlines denied 3 black pilots promotion last year, despite them ranking in the top 5% of all metrics. I know this because one of them emailed me after I spoke out. You said in your memo that demographics shouldn't overtake merit. But I ask you, what is merit if it only rises in rooms that are already mirrored in your image?" Gasps. The moderator shifted uncomfortably. Chase did not respond. Kiana didn't flinch. "You don't have to answer me now, but this industry must. And not in 5 years. Not in committees. Now." After a stunned silence, the room erupted in a mix of applause and side eyes. But the effect was undeniable. An hour later, 5 smaller airlines signed a pledge, drafted on the spot, to establish third-party racial equity reviews, launch internal promotion audits, include marginalized voices in leadership selection panels. By the end of the day, 9 more had joined. In Skybridge, they didn't sign, but they didn't walk out either. That mattered. Later that evening, Kiana was approached by Senator Marsha Langston, chair of the Transportation Ethics Committee. "Ms. Brooks," she said, "your voice has outgrown one airline. How would you feel about joining a federal oversight commission? It's time we took these reforms nationwide." Kiana paused. The offer was enormous, but it meant stepping away from Astroflight, from her team, from the fight she had poured her soul into. That night, she didn't sleep. She walked through the city, watching people get into cabs, board late-night flights, check their phones, and complain about delays, unaware that an invisible war was being fought on their behalf. The next morning, Kiana held a press conference outside Astroflight headquarters. She stepped up to the mic, this time in a casual navy dress and flat shoes. Her voice was calm, steady. I have loved every moment fighting for what astroflight can become. But change isn't a seat, it's a wave. And I want to ride it where it matters most. She announced her resignation as head of reform and her acceptance of the federal commission post to oversee ethical aviation standards across all major U.S. airlines. She closed with, "This isn't a goodbye. It's just an altitude change. Because justice doesn't land. It flies, and it must fly higher." A week later, Kiana boarded a commercial flight, not in a private jet, not in first class. Seat 17A, coach. Next to her, a young black girl traveling alone turned and whispered, "Are you the lady who made the CEO say sorry?" Kiana smiled. "Not just one CEO." The girl grinned. "Cool." And they flew together into a sky she had helped rewrite, not with wings, but with will. Lessons learned from Kiana Brooks' story. Kiana Brooks' journey began as a silent witness to an injustice and ended with her leading a nationwide reform effort that reshaped the skies. But beyond the corporate boardrooms and press conferences, her story holds timeless truths that each of us can take to heart. Whether we work in aviation, education, medicine, or simply walk the streets of a world still learning how to see clearly. Here are the enduring lessons. 1. True leadership begins when you speak for someone who can't speak for themselves. Kiana didn't rise to power by shouting. She rose by refusing to stay silent. When she saw a young black teen publicly humiliated and mishandled on a flight, she could have looked away. She had a safe seat at the table, a promising career trajectory, and 1,000 reasons to let it go. But she didn't. She chose courage over comfort. And that one act of moral clarity set off a chain reaction across an entire industry. Your silence can be someone else's prison. Your voice can be their freedom. 2. Systems don't change until someone inside chooses discomfort. It's easy to point fingers at bad apples or blame incidents on isolated individuals. But racism, especially unconscious bias, thrives in systems where those in power protect their image more than their integrity. Kiana used her position not to preserve her career, but to disrupt the machinery from within. She challenged CEOs, confronted entrenched gatekeepers, and risked everything to demand that airlines stop treating diversity as branding and start treating it as accountability. Reputation is what the world sees. Character is what you fight for when no one's clapping. 3. Justice doesn't always wear a robe. Sometimes it wears a name tag and walks down the aisle. From flight attendants to gate agents, to executives and customers alike, the story reminded us that every individual plays a role in either perpetuating harm or dismantling it. The stewardess who falsely accused a black teen, she thought it was just protocol. The passengers who looked away, they thought it was not their place. But justice isn't abstract. It's deeply human. It shows up when someone chooses to care, when someone chooses to ask, "What if that were my child?" Justice is not a destination. It's a decision made moment by moment, seat by seat, story by story. 4. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is to walk away. Kiana had the chance to become one of the most powerful women in aviation. Instead, she chose to leave her title behind and lead something larger, a federal commission that would rewrite how fairness and ethics were upheld across the skies. She taught us that success isn't measured by how high you climb, but by how many you lift on the way up, and whether you're willing to let go of comfort for impact. Legacy isn't what you keep, it's what you leave behind. Final reflection. Kiana's story isn't just about planes. It's about how far we still have to go, and how high we can fly when truth takes the lead. So the next time you see something unfair, ask yourself, will I be the one who watches or the one who changes the course? Because sometimes one voice, steady, clear, and unshaken is all it takes to bring justice to 30,000 feet.